My name is Sofia Alvarez. I'm 35, and I never anticipated my own mother would publicly shame me at my cousin's wedding. Ladies and gentlemen, Mom declared, clinking her wine glass as she stood at the head table, her voice ringing through the banquet hall. I'd like to propose a toast to my lovely niece, Maria, and her new husband, Lieutenant Commander Diego Rivera. The room hushed, all eyes turning to her. I sat at a corner table with distant cousins, trying to blend into the background in my modest emerald dress. Diego here is a true Navy hero, Mom went on, her smile wide as she nodded at the groom. A submarine officer carrying on the legacy of his great-uncle, who served in the Pacific during World War II. It takes immense bravery to navigate those depths, protecting our country from beneath the seas. I took a slow sip of iced tea, my stomach tightening as I sensed the direction her speech was taking. Now, some of you may be curious about my daughter Sofia over there, Mom said, pointing her glass in my direction. The weight of every gaze in the room landed on me, and a flush crept up my neck. Maria, glowing in her white gown, gave me a sympathetic glance. The truth is, Mom continued, her tone dripping with that familiar mix of maternal disappointment I'd known since childhood. Sofia likes to say she's in the Navy, but she's really just pushing papers at a desk on some base. A few awkward laughs echoed across the tables. My Uncle Juan leaned over, his whisper loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Didn't she flunk out of the Naval Academy? Mom nodded with a theatrical sigh. Exactly. We had such big dreams when she got that appointment, but some people just can't handle the rigor of military life. She's been drifting between odd jobs ever since, never quite finding her footing. I watched Diego shift in his seat, his eyes flicking toward me with a look I couldn't decipher. But still, Mom raised her glass higher. At least she's got a steady paycheck, even if it's not what we envisioned. To Diego and Maria, may your marriage be filled with the honor and commitment that true naval service demands. The crowd lifted their glasses, repeating the toast. I sat motionless, hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching the woman who raised me reduce my entire career to a footnote. As chatter resumed, I considered slipping out early when Diego approached my table. "Ma'am," he said softly, "may I have a word in private?" I followed him to a quiet nook by the dessert table. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uneasy. "Captain," he began, then paused. I'm not sure how you prefer to be addressed out of uniform." I blinked, confused. "What? You're Captain Sofia Alvarez, aren't you? Commanding officer of USS Tucson." My pulse quickened. "How do you know that?" Diego's eyes widened. "Ma'am, you don't recognize me, do you? You're my cousin's husband, Lieutenant Commander Rivera." "Yes, ma'am, but I'm also the operations officer on USS Cheyenne. We've been running coordinated missions with Tucson for the past 14 months. I've sat in briefings with you." I stared at him, trying to connect this tuxedo-clad man with the officer I knew from the wardroom. "Rivera, Diego Rivera, you go by D-Riv in the fleet. That's me, ma'am. I didn't place you at first without your uniform and with your hair loose, but when your mother said your name..." He shook his head, incredulous. "Ma'am, does your family not know what you do?" "Clearly not," I said under my breath. "They don't know you command a Los Angeles-class attack submarine, that you've got 18 years of service, graduated top of your class at the Naval Academy, earned a Silver Star, and have multiple combat deployments." Diego's voice was low but intense, as if he couldn't believe the words coming out of his own mouth. D-Riv, I said firmly. "This stays between us." "Understood?" "Yes, ma'am, but I don't get it." How do they not know? I glanced back at the head table where Mom was charming a group of guests with another anecdote. "Because I've never told them." "But they could easily find out." "Your record is public knowledge for anyone who looks," I sighed, leaning against the wall. "My mother's been convinced I'm a failure since I was 20. When I graduated from the academy, she said I'd never last a year in submarine training. When I qualified, she predicted I'd stall out as a junior officer. When I made commander, she insisted women couldn't handle the real responsibilities of naval command." Diego stared at me, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "So, with all due respect, ma'am, your mother just told 300 people you're basically a secretary." "I heard her," I said flatly, "and you're not going to correct her?" Before I could respond, Maria swept over, slightly flushed from dancing. "Sofia, there you are. Are you enjoying yourself?" She glanced between Diego and me, sensing something unspoken. "I see you've met my husband." Diego, this is my cousin Sophia, the one I told you about who works at the base. Diego opened his mouth, then closed it, looking to me for guidance. It's great to meet you officially, I said smoothly. Congratulations on your wedding. Thank you, ma'am, Diego replied, the words slipping out reflexively. Maria tilted her head, puzzled. Why are you calling her ma'am? She's family, Diego. You're usually so laid back. Diego hesitated, clearly torn. It's just a work habit, he said finally, glancing at me. Oh, right, you're both Navy, Maria said brightly. Maybe you know some of the same people. Maybe, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. My Aunt Clara, Maria's mother, joined us, a bit unsteady from her third glass of wine. Maria, darling, you should introduce Diego to more of the family. Sophia, why don't you tell him about your job? I'm sure he'd love to hear about the clerical side of the Navy. Diego's jaw clenched, and I caught a flicker of frustration in his eyes. Actually, Mrs. Lopez, he said carefully, I'd be very curious to hear about Captain Alvarez's... It's just Sophia, I cut in quickly, and it's pretty mundane stuff. Nothing exciting. Clara patted my shoulder with a pitying smile. Oh, don't sell yourself short. I'm sure organizing files and answering phones is very important in its own way. Diego's expression darkened, and I could tell he was struggling to stay silent. Mrs. Lopez, he said slowly, what exactly do you think Sophia does in the Navy? Well, she works at the submarine base in San Diego, some kind of administrative role. Elena, that's Sophia's mother, said she never really made it as an officer, but at least she's got a stable job. Diego looked at Clara like she'd just claimed the moon was made of cheese. Maria glanced between us, picking up on the tension but not grasping its source. I think, Diego began, his voice measured. There might be some confusion about Sophia, I said firmly, trying to diffuse the situation. It's fine, really. But Diego was already looking past me, his gaze fixed on the head table where Mom was entertaining a cluster of guests with her usual charisma. Excuse me, he said abruptly, striding off before I could stop him. He seems sweet, Maria remarked, watching her new husband weave through the crowd. A bit intense, maybe, but sweet. My stomach churned as I watched Diego approach the head table. He leaned in to say something to Mom, who chuckled and gestured to the empty seat beside her, inviting him to sit. Oh no, I muttered under my breath. What's wrong? Maria asked, her brow furrowing. I couldn't hear their exchange from across the bustling reception hall, but I could see Mom's face shift as Diego spoke. Her bright smile faltered, giving way to a look of puzzlement, then something like unease. Other guests at the table began to notice, their conversations pausing. Uncle Pedro leaned closer, straining to hear. Aunt Lucia set down her fork, her attention fully on the exchange. Then Mom stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, drawing eyes from nearby tables. She was staring straight at me now, her face drained of color. Diego stood too, and his voice carried across the room, clear and steady. Ma'am, with all due respect, I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding about your daughter's naval career. The hum of the reception faded as more guests turned to watch the unfolding scene. Mom walked toward me, Diego at her side, with a small crowd of relatives trailing behind, drawn by the promise of something dramatic. Sophia, Mom said when she reached me, her voice tightly controlled, Diego here has been telling me some very surprising things about your job. Has he? I replied evenly. He says you're the commanding officer of a nuclear submarine. The words hung heavy in the air, amplified by the sudden focus of everyone around us. That's correct, I said simply. Mom's face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and something that looked like betrayal. That's impossible. Why is it impossible? Because you never told us, because you work at some clerical job, because... She faltered, as if realizing how flimsy her assumption sounded. Because you never asked, I said quietly. Because you decided 15 years ago what I was capable of, and you never thought to question it. Uncle Pedro stepped forward, scratching his head. Hold on. You're saying Sophia is actually a submarine captain? Commander, Diego corrected. Commanding officer of USS Tucson, SSN 770, a Los Angeles class attack submarine with a crew of approximately 140 sailors. The crowd around us grew, murmurs rippling through the gathering. Maria looked stunned, her eyes wide. Aunt Clara's mouth hung open, and other relatives whispered to one another, piecing together the revelation. "But you said she flunked out of the Naval Academy," Aunt Lucia said to Mom, her voice tinged with confusion. "I never said that," Mom replied, her tone hollow. "I said she couldn't handle the pressure. I assumed—" "You assumed," I echoed, my voice steady but sharp. "For 18 years of active duty, you assumed?" Maria, still grappling with the news, chimed in. "Sophia, you never said anything. At family dinners, reunions, you never mentioned commanding a submarine." "Commander," Diego corrected again, almost reflexively. "And would you have believed her if she had?" His question silenced the crowd, the truth of it hanging heavy. If I'd walked into a family barbecue and declared I led a nuclear submarine, they'd have thought I was exaggerating. Or worse, delusional. Mom was staring at me like I was a stranger. "The Silver Star Diego mentioned," she said slowly, "and a Navy Commendation Medal with a Combat V, classified operations you can't discuss." "That's right," I said. "My God," Aunt Clara whispered, clutching her glass. "Sophia, why didn't you ever tell us?" I looked around at the circle of faces, family who'd known me since I was a child, who'd cheered at my high school graduation, who'd sent cards when I left for the Naval Academy, who'd sat across from me at countless holiday tables over the past 2 decades. Because, I said slowly, every time I tried to share anything about my career, it was dismissed as unimportant. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. When I made lieutenant, Mom said most officers make lieutenant. When I earned my submarine warfare pin, she called it a consolation prize. When I was selected for command, she said it was probably just to meet diversity quotas. The silence was suffocating, so I pressed on. I spent years trying to prove myself to a family that had already decided I'd failed. So I stopped trying. I stopped sharing because it was easier than being told my achievements didn't matter. Mom's face crumpled, her eyes glistening. "Sophia, I didn't mean—" "Didn't you?" I cut in, my voice gentle but firm. "Because that toast you gave 30 minutes ago suggested otherwise." Diego stepped forward, his posture rigid but his tone respectful. "Ma'am, if I may, your daughter is one of the most exceptional commanders in the submarine force. Her crew would follow her into any mission, no questions asked. I've served under many officers in my 12 years, and I've never seen anyone inspire the kind of trust and dedication that Commander Alvarez does. Diego," I said quietly, "that's enough." "No, ma'am, with respect, it's not." He turned to the crowd, his voice steady but passionate. "Commander Alvarez has dedicated nearly 2 decades to serving this country in one of the most demanding roles in the Navy. She commands a $2.5 billion nuclear submarine and the lives of 140 sailors. She's led missions in waters I can't name, protecting our nation in ways I can't describe. And she's done all this while her own family believed her service was insignificant." The weight of his words settled over the group like a fog. Maria spoke first, her voice trembling. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. We all are. We should have known. Should you?" "How?" I asked. "I never told you." "Because we never asked the right questions," Mom said softly, her voice breaking. "Because we never—" "God, Sophia, I'm so proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know. You didn't want to know," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're right. I made assumptions, and I was too stubborn to challenge them. I thought I was shielding you from failure, but I was really shielding myself from being wrong." I looked around at the faces surrounding me. Family who'd known me my entire life but had never truly seen me, who'd loved me in their way but had never grasped what that love should mean. "The thing is," I said to the group, "I didn't need you to understand my job. I needed you to trust that I was telling you the truth about my life. I needed you to believe I was capable of more than you ever imagined." Aunt Clara was crying now, her hands trembling as she clutched her napkin. "We failed you, Sophia. We all failed you. You made assumptions," I said. "We all make assumptions sometimes. But for 18 years? Uncle Pedro asked, shaking his head in disbelief. 18 years? Yes, I confirmed, my voice steady. Mom reached out hesitantly, her hand hovering as if unsure whether she had the right to touch me. Sophia, can you forgive us? Can you forgive me? I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to braid my hair, to cook tamales for Christmas, to stand tall in the face of adversity, yet who had spent nearly 2 decades dismissing my accomplishments because they didn't align with her vision of who I should be. Mom, I said after a long pause, I forgave you years ago. The question is whether you can forgive yourself. I don't know how, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Start by asking questions instead of assuming you know the answers. Start by listening instead of judging. Start by being proud of who I am, not who you thought I should be. Diego cleared his throat, stepping forward. If I may, ma'am, Commander Alvarez's change of command ceremony is in 6 weeks. She's being promoted to captain and taking command of USS Nevada. It would mean a lot to her crew, and to me personally, if her family were there to support her. The crowd turned to me, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and guilt, as if seeing me for the first time. Captain, Maria whispered, her voice trembling. Pending final approval, yes, I said. My God, Sophia, you're going to be a submarine captain. I already am a submarine commander, I corrected gently. The promotion just makes it official. Mom was staring at me, her expression a tangle of wonder and regret. Would you want us at your ceremony? I'd like that, I said simply. I have so many questions, she said, her voice cracking, about your career, your life, everything I've missed. Then ask them, I replied, but ask them because you want to understand, not because you want to measure whether my answers meet your expectations. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, grasping the difference. As the crowd began to disperse, relatives approached me one by one, some to offer congratulations, others to ask tentative questions about my service, their voices laced with a newfound respect. I felt something shift inside me, not quite vindication or relief, but something closer to resolution. For 18 years, I had carried the weight of their assumptions, their disappointment, their casual dismissal of my life's work. I had let their limited view of me become a silent burden, one I bore without protest. But standing there in that glittering reception hall, surrounded by family who were finally beginning to see me clearly, I realized their failure to understand had never diminished who I was. I had served with honor, led with distinction, and earned the respect of my crew and peers. Whether or not my family acknowledged it, their recognition was welcome, but it wasn't essential. I was exactly who I had always been, a naval officer, a submarine commander, a woman who had devoted her life to protecting her country. Whether they saw that or not didn't change the truth. Later, as the reception began to wind down, Diego approached me again. Ma'am, I want to apologize if I overstepped. I know you asked me to keep your rank confidential. You did the right thing, Diego, I said. And congratulations again on your marriage. Thank you, ma'am. And, it's been an honor serving with you. I hope Maria and I can attend your promotion ceremony. I'd like that, I replied. As I drove home that night, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Mom after most of the guests had left. She'd asked why I never pushed back against her assumptions, never demanded she recognize my achievements. I told her the truth. Early in my career, I learned that the most powerful response to being underestimated was not to argue, but to excel, to let my work speak for itself, to lead with quiet confidence rather than shouting for validation. It had taken 18 years, but tonight, my work had finally spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my career commanding one of the most advanced weapons platforms in the world, overseeing national security operations so classified most people would never know they existed. Yet the victory that felt most complete was simply being seen for who I was by the people who had known me longest. Sometimes, the most profound revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of being exactly who you've always been while everyone else finally catches up to the truth.